The rain poured mercilessly that night as I stood on the sidewalk, watching the porch light switch off. My stepfather's words still rang in my ears. "You'll never amount to anything, Mason. Get out and don't come back." I was 17, with nothing but a duffel bag of clothes and two $14 to my name. That was 12 years ago. Now I park my Tesla in front of that same house, adjusting my tie as I prepare for what might be the most satisfying meeting of my life. The manila envelope on the passenger seat contains mortgage documents with my signature on the lender line and his on the borrower line. Life has a funny way of coming full circle. This is the story of how I went from homeless teenager to owning, the mortgage on the house I was thrown out of, and the unexpected lesson I learned along the way. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Growing up in Lakeside, Connecticut wasn't exactly the picture-perfect suburban childhood you'd imagine. My father, Daniel Clark, died when I was 6, a construction accident that left my mother, Patricia, a widow at 32. I have faint memories of him, calloused hands, the scent of sawdust, and a laugh that seemed to fill our small house. But mostly, I remember the void his absence created. For 3 years, it was just Mom and me in our modest 2-bedroom home near Crescent Lake. She worked double shifts at Hartford Memorial Hospital as a nurse, while I became acquainted with microwave dinners and the elderly neighbor, Mrs. Winters, who checked on me until Mom got home. We weren't wealthy, but we had each other, and somehow that felt like enough. Everything changed when Mom met Richard Harrington at a hospital fundraiser. Richard was charismatic, confident, and most importantly, financially stable as the regional manager of a pharmaceutical company. Unlike us, he lived in the affluent part of town in a colonial-style house with perfectly manicured lawns. He drove a BMW and wore watches that cost more than our monthly rent. "Mason, you're going to love Richard," Mom said, her eyes sparkling, in a way I hadn't seen since Dad died. "He makes me happy. Don't you want me to be happy?" Of course I did. So I smiled and shook Richard's hand when he came over for dinner, laughed at his jokes that weren't funny, and pretended not to notice. How he subtly criticized our home, our furniture, even the way Mom and I interacted. "You let the boy speak to you that way?" he'd ask when I'd tease Mom about her terrible cooking. In my house, children show respect. That should have been my first warning. Within 6 months, Richard proposed. Within 8, we had moved into his house, and I had enrolled in Lakeside Preparatory Academy, an elite private school where I stood out like a sore thumb among kids who had never worried about money a day in their lives. "This is your chance to make something of yourself," Richard told me as he dropped me off on the first day, gesturing to the imposing brick buildings. "Don't waste it." For the first year, things were tolerable. Richard was strict, but not cruel. He expected perfect grades, impeccable manners, and for me to participate in the right extracurriculars that would look good on college applications. Tennis lessons, debate club, volunteering at the hospital where Mom worked. My previous interests, sketching, playing guitar, basketball with neighborhood kids, were deemed wastes of time. "Art won't pay the bills," Richard would say dismissively when he caught me drawing. "And music is a hobby, not a career path." Mom would smile apologetically, but never contradicted him. Gradually, I watched her transform from the independent, spirited woman who had raised me alone to someone who seemed constantly anxious about pleasing her new husband. She adopted his opinions, his tastes, even his dismissive attitude toward things she had once encouraged in me. "Richard just wants what's best for you," became her mantra whenever I complained. The tension between Richard and me grew more palpable as I entered my teens. I was never outright rebellious. I maintained good grades, stayed out of trouble, and followed his countless rules, but I couldn't manufacture the admiration and deference he seemed to expect. My very existence appeared to irritate him, as if I were a persistent reminder of Mom's life before him. The summer I turned 15, Mom announced she was pregnant. The news hit me like a physical blow, though I forced a smile and offered congratulations. Richard didn't even attempt to hide his elation. "Finally, a child of my own," he said, embracing Mom while giving me a look that clearly communicated my outsider status. As Mom's pregnancy progressed, Richard's attitude toward me deteriorated. Small criticisms evolved into outright hostility. Nothing I did was right. Every accomplishment was minimized. If I got an A, he'd ask why it wasn't an A+. If I won second place in a debate tournament, he'd focus on who beat me. My presence at dinner became a source of tension, with Richard often finding fault with my posture, my table manners, or my conversational contributions. Mom was too consumed with her difficult pregnancy to notice or intervene. She had severe morning sickness for the first 5 months, followed by complications that required bed rest. I tried to help as much as possible, cooking simple meals, doing laundry, keeping the house tidy, but Richard invariably found my efforts insufficient. "You call this clean?" he'd scoff, running his finger along a surface I'd just dusted. "This is exactly your problem, Mason. Half measures, no attention to detail. No wonder your father never made anything of himself. Those jabs at my dad's memory stung the most." Richard knew exactly where to aim his verbal arrows for maximum damage. The real turning point came when Emily Harrington was born. 3 weeks premature but healthy and perfect, with Mom's auburn hair and Richard's blue eyes. I'd never seen Richard so gentle, so openly loving as he was with that tiny bundle. For a brief, optimistic moment, I thought maybe the new addition would soften him, would somehow make us feel more like a real family. I was catastrophically wrong. With Emily's arrival, Richard seemed to view me not just as an inconvenience but as a threat. He began to monitor my interactions with my half-sister obsessively, as if I might somehow contaminate her with my apparent inadequacy. "Wash your hands before you touch her," he'd bark when I'd come to see the baby. "Don't hold her like that," he'd snap, immediately taking Emily from my arms if she made the slightest fussing sound. The unspoken message was clear. You don't belong in this picture. You are not part of this family. As Mom recovered from a difficult delivery, she became increasingly withdrawn, suffering what I later recognized as postpartum depression. Richard hired a nanny, Mrs. Anderson, to care for Emily and help around the house, effectively removing any useful role I might have played. I became a ghost in the house, retreating to my room to avoid Richard's criticism and Mom's vacant stares. The summer before my senior year of high school, I got a part-time job at the local bookstore, partly to earn money for college applications and partly to escape the suffocating atmosphere at home. Richard surprisingly approved, probably because it meant seeing less of me. "At least you're learning the value of work," he said, though his tone suggested skepticism about my capabilities even in this modest employment. That job became my sanctuary. Between shelving books and helping customers, I could read, think, and exist without constant judgment. My manager, Jennifer Parker, was a retired English professor who recognized my interest in literature and architecture. She began recommending books beyond the standard high school curriculum and engaged me in conversations about everything from classical mythology to urban planning. "You have a good mind, Mason," she told me once. "And more importantly, you have imagination. Don't let anyone convince you that it's worthless." Those words were a lifeline I clung to during the increasingly tense evenings at home. As Emily grew from newborn to infant, Richard became more overtly hostile toward me. The pretense of trying to make me better dropped away, revealing simple resentment. The breaking point arrived 2 months before my 18th birthday. I had applied to several colleges, focusing on architecture programs despite Richard's insistence that I should pursue business or pre-med. When acceptance letters began arriving, including one from Cornell with a partial scholarship, I was ecstatic. For the first time in years, I felt a genuine sense of possibility. I made the mistake of sharing this news at dinner. Architecture, Richard scoffed, setting down his fork with exaggerated care. You want to waste your education drawing pictures of buildings? It's more than that, I tried to explain. It's about designing spaces that affect how people live, combining art and engineering. It's a fantasy, he cut me off. Your father had similar delusions of grandeur. That's why he ended up breaking his neck on a construction site instead of running the company. Dreamers end up failures, Mason. Dad. Wasn't a failure, I said quietly, feeling heat rise in my face. Your father left your mother without a penny. Richard's voice was cold. If it weren't for me, you'd probably be living in some apartment in the bad part of town right now. I've given you every advantage, and this is how you plan to squander it? Mom, who had been mechanically feeding Emily in her high chair, finally spoke up. Richard, Cornell is a wonderful school. Maybe we should stay out of this, Patricia, Richard snapped. You've always coddled him, and look where it's gotten him. I stood up, unable to stomach another minute. I'm going to Cornell. I got a scholarship, and I'll take out loans for the rest. I don't need your money. Richard laughed, a sound entirely devoid of humor. Big talk from someone who's never paid a bill in his life. You have no idea what the real world is like. Maybe not, I admitted. But I'd rather find out than spend another minute pretending to be grateful to you. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. Richard's face darkened as he stood, looming over the table. You ungrateful little... He caught himself, glancing at Emily, who had begun to whimper at the raised voices. After everything I've done for you. What exactly have you done for me? The words tumbled out before I could stop them. Made me feel unwelcome in my own home? Criticized everything I've ever cared about? Tried to erase my father's memory? I put a roof over your head, he hissed. Fed you, clothed you, paid for that fancy school, and this is the thanks I get. Mom rose shakily. Please, both of you, stop. Emily is getting upset. But something had broken open inside me, years of suppressed resentment finally finding a voice. You never wanted me here. You've made that clear from day one. You've just been waiting for an excuse to get rid of me. Mason, Mom pleaded, tears in her eyes. That's not true. Richard's expression shifted from anger to something colder and more calculated. Actually, Patricia, he's right. I have tolerated his presence for your sake, but he's clearly determined to throw away every opportunity I've provided. He turned to me, his voice eerily calm now. You want to make your own way? Fine. You have two choices. Either accept my guidance on a sensible career path and college choice, or you can leave this house and see how well your dreams serve you in the real world. The ultimatum hung in the air. Mom was openly crying now, Emily wailing in response to the tension. Richard, he's still in high school, Mom protested weakly. He's old enough to make adult decisions, Richard countered, and to live with the consequences. He turned back to me. Well, what's it going to be? In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity what my future would be if I stayed. Years of having my identity and aspirations systematically crushed under Richard's controlling thumb. I looked at my mother, silently begging her to defend me, to choose me, but she looked away, focusing on quieting Emily. I'll leave, I said, the words dropping like stones into the sudden silence. Richard didn't even try to hide his satisfaction. I thought so. You have until tomorrow evening to pack your things. Tomorrow? Mom gasped. No, that's not... It's... Fine, Mom, I interrupted, a strange calm settling over me. I'd rather sleep under a bridge than spend another night in this house. I walked out of the dining room and up to my bedroom, where I began methodically sorting through my possessions, deciding what would fit in my duffel bag and backpack. As I packed, the reality of my situation began to sink in. I had about $200 saved from my bookstore job, no car, 2 months until high school graduation, nowhere to go. But beneath the fear was something unexpected: relief. The constant pressure of trying to exist in Richard's house without triggering his disapproval had been slowly crushing me. Whatever lay ahead would at least be my own choice. Later, that night, Mom crept into my room, her eyes red-rimmed. "You don't have to go," she whispered. "I'll talk to Richard." I looked at the woman who had once been my fierce protector, now reduced to sneaking around her own house. Would it make any difference? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. "He's been waiting for this chance since he married you," I said gently. "We both know that." Mom sank onto my bed. "I never thought. I just wanted you to have a father again, a stable home." "I know," I said, sitting beside her. "But Richard isn't a father to me. He never wanted to be." She took something from her robe pocket, a small bundle wrapped in tissue paper. "Take this," she said, pressing it into my hand. "It's not much, but..." Inside was $500 in cash and a delicate gold chain with a small pendant, a compass rose that had belonged to my father. I hadn't seen it since his funeral, when Mom had worn it. "Dad gave you this," I said, trying to hand the necklace back. "And now I'm giving it to you," she insisted, closing my fingers around it. "To remember that you can always find your way." Her voice broke. "I'm so sorry, Mason." I couldn't speak past the lump in my throat, so I just nodded. We sat in silence for a few minutes before she stood. "Where will you go?" she asked. "I have a few ideas," I lied. In truth, I had exactly zero plan, but couldn't bear to add to her guilt. The next evening, as a spring storm gathered on the horizon, I stood on the front porch with my bags at my feet. Richard watched from the doorway, arms crossed, as Mom hugged me fiercely. "Call me when you're settled," she whispered. "I'll help however I can." Richard cleared his throat pointedly. "Time to go, Mason." I shouldered my backpack and picked up my duffel. "Goodbye, Mom. Kiss Emily for me." As I walked down the path toward the sidewalk, Richard called after me. "When you fail, and you will fail, don't come crawling back." I didn't turn around, didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing my face. The first fat raindrops began to fall as I reached the street. Behind me, I heard the porch light switch off and the front door close with a decisive click. Standing alone in the gathering darkness, I gripped the compass pendant through my shirt and made a promise to myself. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. The rain soaked through my jacket within minutes as I walked away from the only home I'd known for the past 8 years. Each step felt both terrifying and liberating, the weight of Richard's final condemnation competing with the sudden absence of his suffocating presence. With no particular destination, I headed toward downtown Lakeside, where the lights of shops and restaurants offered at least the illusion of warmth. My first stop was the 24-hour diner where truckers and night shift workers gathered. I ordered the cheapest coffee on the menu and spread out a town map I'd grabbed from the rack near the entrance, trying to formulate some kind of plan. The waitress, Donna, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and efficiency in her movements, kept refilling my cup without charging me extra. "You look like you're having a rough night, hon," she said during her third refill. It wasn't a question, and I didn't treat it as one. Around midnight, as the diner emptied and Donna began wiping down tables, she approached me again. "We close the dining room at once, but the counter stays open all night if you need a place to sit." The understanding in her eyes told me she'd seen kids like me before, suddenly adrift, trying to look like they had somewhere to go. "Thanks," I said, "but I should probably find somewhere to sleep." Donna hesitated, then scribbled something on her order pad. My nephew manages the Sunset Motel down on Route 9. Nothing fancy, but it's clean. Tell him Donna sent you and he'll give you the weekly rate instead of nightly. Might help stretch whatever you've got a little further. That small kindness from a stranger nearly broke me. I thanked her with a voice that wasn't entirely steady and headed out into the night again, clutching the address like a lifeline. The Sunset Motel lived down to its weathered exterior, but true to Donna's word, her nephew Tyler knocked 30% off the weekly rate. The room was smaller than my bedroom at Richard's house, with faded wallpaper and a mattress that sagged in the middle, but it was a shelter. I calculated that with Mom's $500 and my savings, I could stay for about 3 weeks if I was extremely careful with food. That first night, I lay awake staring at water stains on the ceiling, the enormity of my situation washing over me in waves. I was still a high school student with 2 months until graduation. I had no car, limited funds, and nowhere to go when the money ran out. The partial scholarship to Cornell seemed like a distant dream now. Even if I could figure out how to finance the remainder of the tuition, how would I afford housing, books, food? Sleep finally came in fitful bursts, interrupted by anxiety dreams where I was running through endless hallways in Richard's house, unable to find the exit. I woke up disoriented, momentarily forgetting where I was, until the unfamiliar smell of the motel room brought reality crashing back. That morning, I created a systematic plan with the determined precision Richard had unwittingly taught me. First priority, finish high school. Second, secure more stable housing. Third, figure out if Cornell was still possible or if I needed a new plan. I walked the 3 miles back to Lakeside Prep, arriving just as the first period began. The school counselor, Mrs. Abernathy, was startled when I explained my situation. "Mason, why didn't you come to us immediately?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. 17 is still a minor. There are laws about this sort of thing. I'll be 18 in 6 weeks, I pointed out. And I'm not going back to that house. Mrs. Abernathy made some calls, explaining options that ranged from temporary foster placement to emancipation proceedings. But I resisted. The legal process would be messy, potentially dragging Mom into a situation that would force her to choose between me and her husband, a choice I wasn't confident she would make in my favor. "At least let me arrange something better than a motel," Mrs. Abernathy insisted. "One of our faculty might have a spare room." That afternoon, I found myself sitting in the book-lined living room of Dr. Raymond Walsh, my AP literature teacher. A widower in his 60s with a reputation for brilliance and eccentricity, Dr. Walsh lived in a modest bungalow near campus with his 2 elderly basset hounds. "Mrs. Abernathy tells me you're in need of lodging," he said, pushing his wire-rimmed glasses up his nose. "I have a small guest room that's mostly storage at this point, but it has a bed. You're welcome to it until graduation if you help with some household tasks." The arrangement was formal but fair. I would cook dinner 3 nights a week, walk the dogs daily, help with yard work on weekends, and maintain my GPA above 3.8. In exchange, I had shelter, access to the kitchen, and most importantly, a quiet place to study. Dr. Walsh never asked intrusive questions about my situation, though I knew Mrs. Abernathy had given him the basics. Instead, he treated me with the same respectful distance he showed all his students, with the added dimension of sharing living space. After dinner each evening, we would often sit in companionable silence in his study, him grading papers while I worked on assignments or college financial aid applications. Occasionally, he would break the silence to share observations about whatever he was reading or to ask my opinion on a student's essay approach. Those moments of being treated as an intellectual peer rather than a burden or disappointment were healing in ways I couldn't articulate at the time. One evening, after I mentioned my interest in architecture during dinner, Dr. Walsh disappeared into his attic and returned with a dust-covered box. "My late wife's brother was an architect," he explained, setting the box on the table. "Elizabeth kept these after he passed. I think you might find them interesting." Inside were sketchbooks, technical manuals, and a complete set of drafting tools that must have been worth hundreds of dollars. I looked up, speechless. Elizabeth would have wanted them used, not gathering dust, Dr. Walsh said simply. Consider it an early graduation present. The tools and books became my most prized possessions. At night, after finishing homework, I would practice drawing, teaching myself the fundamentals of architectural drafting from the manuals. The precision and creativity of the work absorbed me completely, providing escape from the anxiety that still woke me in the early hours. School became both refuge and challenge. News of my situation had inevitably spread among faculty, though I asked Mrs. Abernathy to keep details private from other students. Some teachers showed awkward sympathy. Others, like my calculus teacher, who had always favored students from wealthy families, became notably cooler. My classmates, children of privilege with college funds and family connections, couldn't understand why I had suddenly become so focused on scholarship applications and part-time job listings instead of senior parties and graduation plans. My few friends drifted away, unsure how to relate to my new circumstances. Mom called my cell phone regularly, though I could tell from her hushed tone that she was hiding these conversations from Richard. She offered money several times, which I declined, knowing it would only create more problems for her at home. She told me Emily had started walking, described her first words, and sent photos. I saved every picture but maintained emotional distance, sensing that my half-sister was becoming the unwitting hostage in Richard's campaign to exert control. He says you can come back if you agree to his terms, Mom said during one call. Business school instead of architecture. Maybe you could consider it? You know I can't do that, I replied gently. It would never work. The conversation ended in her tears, as many did. Each call left me drained and angry, not at Mom, but at the situation that had transformed her from the strong, single mother who had raised me into someone who couldn't protect her own son from her husband's hostility. 6 weeks after being kicked out, I turned 18. Dr. Walsh surprised me with a small cake at dinner, and Jennifer from the bookstore took me to lunch. Mom sent a card with a $100 bill tucked inside and a note that simply said, "I believe in you." Those small kindnesses made what could have been a painfully lonely milestone into something bearable. As graduation approached, I faced the reality of Cornell's costs. Despite receiving additional need-based aid after explaining my circumstances, the numbers simply didn't add up. I would need to take on massive loans while working full-time, a combination that seemed destined for failure given architecture's demanding curriculum. The solution came from an unexpected quarter. During a routine shift at the bookstore, I was shelving architecture books when a customer, a gray-haired man in a tailored suit, asked if I had recommendations on urban design theory. "Are you an architect?" I asked as I guided him to the relevant section. "Developer," he answered. "Reynolds Commercial Properties. But the best developers understand architecture." He glanced at the book in my hands, one of the manuals from Dr. Walsh's box. "Are you a student?" "Heading to college in the fall," I said. "Architecture major. At least that's the plan." Something in my tone must have conveyed uncertainty because he looked at me more closely. "Where?" "Cornell." "If I can make the finances work." He handed me a business card. "I'm Taylor Reynolds. My firm has a scholarship program for promising architecture students. Small stipend, summer internship. If you're interested, send your portfolio to the email address. Application deadline is next week." That night, I stayed up until dawn selecting my best drawings, writing the application essay, and gathering recommendations from Dr. Walsh and Jennifer. 1 week later, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Mason Clark? This is Diane from Reynolds Commercial. Mr. Reynolds was impressed with your portfolio and would like to meet with you tomorrow at our Hartford office." The interview lasted 3 hours, during which Taylor Reynolds scrutinized my drawings, questioned my theoretical approach to design problems, and shared stories from his own career path. At the end, he leaned back in his chair with a satisfied expression. "Your work shows remarkable intuition for someone with no formal training," he said. "Raw talent isn't enough in this field, but it's a good starting point. The scholarship is yours if you want it." The terms were better than I had dared hope. $10,000 per year toward tuition, guaranteed summer internships with salary, and a mentor relationship with one of the firm's senior architects. Combined with my other scholarships and reasonable loans, Cornell suddenly became possible again. Graduation day arrived with mixed emotions. Dr. Walsh attended as my guest, sitting alone in the audience while other student sections overflowed with proud families. I scanned the crowd once, looking for Mom, though I knew Richard would never have allowed her to come. As I accepted my diploma, I felt a complex surge of grief, pride, and determination. The principal had just announced the final graduate when I noticed a commotion at the back of the auditorium. Turning, I saw Mom slipping into a seat in the last row, Emily in her arms. She had come after all. Our eyes met briefly across the distance, her smile tearful but genuine. She held Emily's tiny hand up in a wave before disappearing out the side door, presumably before Richard discovered her absence. That small act of rebellion gave me hope that perhaps someday she would find the strength to make larger ones. After the ceremony, as families took photos and celebrated, I stood awkwardly with Dr. Walsh near the refreshment table. "What's next for you?" he asked, handing me a cup of punch. 2 weeks at the motel while I work extra shifts, then off to Ithaca for summer session, I replied. Cornell had arranged early dormitory access for students in my situation, another unexpected kindness in a world that had seemed so harsh months earlier. Dr. Walsh nodded approvingly. "You've handled adversity with more grace than many adults. Manage. I think you'll find that the resilience you've developed will serve you well." As we walked toward the parking lot, I spotted Richard standing near his BMW, checking his watch impatiently while Mom strapped Emily into her car seat. He looked up, his gaze colliding with mine across the distance. For a moment, we simply stared at each other, a current of mutual dislike almost visible in the air between us. Then, deliberately, I turned away, breaking the connection. He had no power over me anymore. That night, in the quiet of Dr. Walsh's guest room, I packed my few possessions and wrote him a thank you note that felt woefully inadequate for the stability he had provided during the most turbulent period of my life. As I carefully placed my father's compass pendant in my bag, I realized I had survived the worst Richard could do to me. The path ahead would be challenging, working while studying, stretching every dollar, building a future from scratch. But, for the first time since that rainy night when I was thrown out, I felt genuine optimism. The survival phase was ending. What came next would be about building, not just enduring. What I couldn't have known then was how dramatically my path would eventually intersect with Richard's again, or that the architectural knowledge and business acumen I was about to acquire would one day place his financial future in my hands. But that part of the story was still years away, waiting to unfold through choices and circumstances I couldn't yet imagine. As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself wondering what Richard would think if he could see the future, if he knew that. The boy he had deemed worthless would one day hold the deed to the house he had been so proud to exclude me from. The irony might have made me smile if I had known. Instead, I slept deeply and dreamlessly, conserving energy for the journey ahead. Ithaca in summer was nothing like Connecticut. The Cornell campus sprawled across hills overlooking Cayuga Lake, its Gothic buildings and modern facilities existing in surprising harmony. My dormitory room was sparse but functional. A twin bed, desk, dresser, and window with a view of trees rather than the parking lot. It felt like luxury after months at Dr. Walsh's and weeks at the Sunset Motel. Summer session began with orientation for scholarship students, where I met others who, like me, were navigating college without family support. Tristan Jackson, my roommate, had grown up in foster care in Philadelphia. Lucia Ramirez was working 3 jobs to supplement her partial scholarship. Marcus Chen had left an abusive home situation similar to mine. We recognized in each other a shared determination that created instant bonds. First-generation college. Squad, Tristan joked as we compared our impossible schedules, classes, work-study positions, the side gigs we'd all scrambled to find. They have no idea how hard we had to hustle just to get here. The architecture program hit us like a tidal wave that first week. The curriculum was notorious for its rigor, with studio projects that regularly kept students working until dawn. Our professors made no secret of the fact that many wouldn't make it past the first year. Architecture isn't just art or engineering. Professor Kathleen Donovan announced during our first design theory lecture, "It's problem-solving under constraints, budget limitations, client demands, material properties, social needs, environmental factors. If you're not comfortable with complexity and contradiction, you're in the wrong field." Her words resonated with me in unexpected ways. Wasn't that exactly what the past few months had taught me? Navigating constraints, finding solutions with limited resources, balancing competing needs. Perhaps life had been preparing me for this discipline all along. My first summer internship at Reynolds Commercial began in July. 3 days a week, I took the bus from Ithaca to the firm's satellite office in Syracuse, where I was assigned to shadow Elaine Winters, a project manager with 20 years of experience and 0 patience for mistakes. "You're here to learn, not to impress anyone," she told me on day 1. "Ask questions, take notes, and don't touch anything without permission." The work was far from glamorous. Organizing blueprints, running calculations, creating basic models under strict supervision, but it offered glimpses into the profession I'd committed to. I observed client meetings where Elaine deftly balanced artistic vision with practical constraints. I watched heated debates between architects and engineers about structural possibilities. I learned how budget limitations shaped design decisions at every stage. Most valuably, I began to understand the business side of architecture, how firms made money, how projects were priced, how contracts worked. This was knowledge Richard would have approved of, though he'd never know I was acquiring it alongside the design skills he had dismissed. By fall semester, I had settled into a punishing routine. Studios and lectures during the day, work study, job shelving books at the architecture library in the evenings, internship work on weekends, and design projects filling every remaining hour. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't often afford. The physical toll was evident. I lost weight, developed perpetual shadows under my eyes, and caught every virus that circulated through the dorms. But mentally, I was thriving. Each completed project, each successful critique, each small paycheck felt like a direct refutation of Richard's prediction of my failure. My only regular contact with home was through weekly phone calls with Mom, which had developed a careful choreography. She would call when Richard was at work or golf, speaking in a normal voice until Emily made noise in the background, then shifting to hushed tones. I learned to extract the truth from what remained unsaid. Her insistence that everything is fine, accompanied by a slight tremor in her voice. Her deflection when I asked about her nursing career, which Richard had pressured her to abandon after Emily's birth. The calls always ended the same way. "We miss you. When will you visit?" And my standard reply, "When I can, Mom. Send Emily. My love." We both knew I wouldn't return to Richard's house, and she never pushed the issue. Instead, she mailed care packages with homemade cookies and photos of Emily growing from infant to toddler. I kept the photos on my desk, but maintained emotional distance, aware that my half-sister was being raised to view me as the family failure who had abandoned them. As freshman year progressed, I found myself drawn to sustainable urban design, architecture, that addressed environmental concerns while creating socially equitable spaces. Professor Donovan noticed my interest and introduced me to a graduate study group focused on adaptive reuse of industrial buildings in economically depressed areas. These projects require thinking beyond aesthetics, she explained. They're about revitalizing communities, creating jobs, respecting history while enabling progress. It's architecture with a social impact. This approach resonated deeply. Architecture could be more than designing luxury homes for people like Richard. It could transform struggling neighborhoods like the one Mom and I had lived in before her remarriage. I began focusing my projects on this intersection of design, sustainability, and community development. My second summer with Reynolds Commercial opened unexpected doors. Taylor Reynolds assigned me to a team working on transforming an abandoned factory into mixed-income housing and retail space, exactly the kind of project I'd been studying. "Your professors say you have potential in this area," he said. "Let's see what you can contribute." The project architect, David Mercer, was initially skeptical of the undergraduate intern, but gradually began involving me in meaningful ways. By August, I was sitting in on community feedback sessions, helping refine designs based on resident input, and learning how successful developments balanced profit with social benefit. One evening, as we worked late finalizing presentation boards, David asked about my background. "Reynolds doesn't usually invest this much in students," he observed. "What's your connection?" I explained my chance meeting with Taylor at the bookstore, the scholarship, my determination to succeed despite being cut off from family support. David nodded thoughtfully. "Taylor has good instincts about people. He built his company from nothing, after his father gambled away the family construction business. He recognizes grit when he sees it." This revelation about Taylor's past explained his interest in my situation. Perhaps he saw in me a reflection of his younger self, someone determined to build something from nothing. That fall, returning for sophomore year, I noticed subtle shifts in how professors and fellow students treated me. My consistent performance and growing portfolio had earned a degree of respect. I was no longer seen as the scholarship case likely to wash out, but as a serious student with particular strengths in community-centered design. The social aspects of college remained challenging. While my first-generation squad provided friendship and understanding, I remained disconnected from the mainstream social scene. Fraternity parties and weekend trips required time and money I didn't have. Dating seemed an impossible luxury. Given my schedule, occasionally this isolation stung, particularly when classmates complained about oppressive parents who were paying their full tuition or lamented having to fly economy instead of business class for spring break. In those moments, Richard's voice would echo in my head. "You don't belong here." I channeled that discomfort into work, pushing myself harder, staying later in the studio, taking on additional projects. Professor Donovan eventually intervened, after finding me asleep at my drafting table at 6 a.m. for the third time in a week. "Excellence doesn't require self-destruction, Mason," she said, handing me a coffee. "Architecture is a marathon, not a sprint. You need to sustain yourself for the long run." Her concern prompted reluctant reflection. I had been defining myself in opposition to Richard, working myself to exhaustion to prove him wrong. But in doing so, I was allowing his judgment to control me just as effectively as when I had lived under his roof. True independence would mean defining success on my own terms. I began making small adjustments. I joined an intramural soccer team that met once weekly, reconnecting with the sport I'd loved before Richard deemed it unworthy. I accepted dinner invitations from classmates instead of automatically declining. I even attended a lecture series on jazz and architecture that had nothing to do with my projects, but simply interested me. Each of these small acts of balance felt like reclaiming pieces of myself that had been suppressed. First by Richard's criticism, and then by my own driving need to prove him wrong. Junior year brought new opportunities and challenges. Professor Donovan recommended me for a prestigious study abroad program in Barcelona, where pioneering work in sustainable urban design was transforming the city. The program would offer invaluable experience, but would interrupt my internship with Reynolds Commercial. When I called Taylor to explain my dilemma, his response surprised me. "Go to Barcelona. he said without hesitation. International experience is invaluable. We'll hold your position. In fact, I'm interested in expanding into European markets. You can be our eyes on the ground, reporting back on innovations we might adapt. With Taylor's blessing and additional funding from a university travel grant, I found myself in Barcelona the following January. The city was a revelation. Ancient Roman walls alongside Gaudi's organic modernism, traditional neighborhoods adjacent to cutting-edge sustainable developments. I absorbed everything: the seamless public transportation, the mixed-use zoning that created vibrant streets, the integration of historic preservation with forward-thinking design. Living in a city shaped by centuries of architectural evolution expanded my thinking beyond what any classroom could teach. I documented everything in detailed sketchbooks, photographed innovative solutions, interviewed local architects and planners, and sent regular reports to Taylor as promised. My host family, the Garcias, welcomed me with warmth that highlighted how long I'd gone without true family connection. Dinner was a nightly ritual where multiple generations gathered to share food and animated conversation. Senora Garcia insisted on improving my Spanish while her husband debated architecture with me. Their children taught me local slang, and their grandmother pressed additional servings of paella onto my plate. "You're too thin," she would say in Spanish. How can you build buildings if you have no strength? The Garcias' genuine interest in my work and well-being gradually softened the defensive barriers I'd constructed. Through them, I experienced family as a source of support rather than judgment, of encouragement rather than criticism. This healing was as valuable as the architectural knowledge I was gaining. The program culminated in a collaborative project, with local architecture students to design a community center for a working-class neighborhood. Our team's proposal, which incorporated renewable energy, flexible use spaces, and elements that honored the area's industrial history, won first place in the final competition. The Neighborhood Association even requested permission to present our design to city planners for consideration. "This is why I became an architect," my project partner Elena said, as residents enthusiastically reviewed our plans. "To make spaces that matter to people's lives." I returned to Cornell for senior year transformed, not just professionally, but personally. The experience had cemented my commitment to community-centered design, while teaching me that success could include balance and connection, not just achievement and recognition. This new perspective influenced my thesis project, a proposal for revitalizing a declining industrial area in Hartford, Connecticut, not far from where I had grown up. The design incorporated affordable housing, green spaces, workforce development facilities, and adaptive reuse of historic factory buildings. It was ambitious, perhaps unrealistically so for a student project, but it synthesized everything I had learned about architecture as a tool for social and economic transformation. My thesis advisor, Professor Whitman, pushed me to ground my idealism in practicality. Beautiful vision, but who pays for it? How does the financing work? What's the phased implementation plan? Developers need to make money or nothing gets built. These questions forced me to integrate the business knowledge I'd gained through my internships. I researched tax incentives, public-private partnerships, grant opportunities, and innovative financing models. I created detailed pro formas, showing how strategic phasing could generate early returns to fund later stages. I demonstrated how thoughtful design could create value that justified investment. The resulting thesis was as much a business plan as an architectural proposal. When Professor Whitman suggested I submit it to the Urban Land Institute's student competition, I was skeptical but complied. 3 months later, I received the email. My project had won first place, including a $15,000 prize and an opportunity to present at the ULI's annual conference in Chicago. The judges' comments specifically praised the project's integration of design excellence with financial feasibility, the very balance I had been striving to achieve. At the conference, Surrounded by leading developers, architects, and urban planners, I felt both intimidated and exhilarated. After my presentation, several firms approached with business cards and invitations to interview. Among them was Alexis Parnell, founder of Parnell Urban Initiatives, a firm known for successful community development projects in underserved areas. "Your approach is aligned with our philosophy," she said. "We're expanding our East Coast operations and looking for associates who understand both design and finance. When you graduate, call me." That night, I called Mom with the news about the award and job prospects. For the first time in years, I didn't hear anxiety in her voice as she congratulated me. "I always knew you would prove him wrong," she said, quietly. "This isn't about Richard," I replied, realizing as I said it that it was finally true. "It's about what I want to create in the world." The silence that followed felt like acknowledgement of how far I had come from the angry, defensive teenager who had been thrown out into the rain. That version of me had been defined by Richard's rejection. This version was defined by my own vision and values. As graduation approached, I weighed my options. Taylor Reynolds had offered a full-time position with significant responsibility and excellent compensation. Parnell Urban Initiatives presented the opportunity to work directly on the kind of community-focused projects I was passionate about. Several other firms had made compelling offers as well. The decision became clear when I received an unexpected call from Hartford's Economic Development Director, who had seen my thesis project at the ULI conference. "We're implementing a revitalization initiative for the exact area you studied," he explained. "Your analysis of the district was more thorough than some of our paid consultants. We'd like you to consider joining the city's planning team as a project coordinator." The role would involve lower pay than private sector offers, but would provide invaluable experience working directly with community stakeholders, government agencies, and private developers. It would place me at the intersection of policy, design, and finance, exactly where I believed I could make the greatest impact. I accepted the Hartford position, planning to work there for 2 years before potentially starting my own practice or joining a firm like Parnell's. What I didn't realize was that this decision would ultimately place me in direct opposition to Richard Harrington's financial interests in ways I couldn't yet imagine. As I stood on the graduation stage receiving my diploma, I searched the audience and found Dr. Walsh sitting beside Jennifer from the bookstore and Elaine from Reynolds Commercial, the makeshift family that had supported my journey. Mom had sent regrets with another care package, explaining that Emily had a dance recital the same weekend. Looking out at the crowd of proud families, I no longer felt the ache of exclusion that had marked my high school graduation. Instead, I felt gratitude for the path that had led me here, even the painful parts. Without Richard's cruel dismissal, without the struggle to support myself, I might never have developed the resilience and determination that now defined me. The compass, pendant my father had given my mother, which she had passed to me on that fateful night, hung around my neck under my graduation gown. It had guided me through the darkest periods, a reminder that I could always find my way forward. As I moved the tassel on my cap from right to left, I silently thanked the scared 17-year-old who had walked away from Richard's house rather than surrendering his dreams. That version of me could never have imagined that in just 5 years, market forces, strategic decisions, and a specific set of skills would place Richard Harrington's financial security in my hands. The architecture student was about to become an unexpected power player in Hartford's real estate market, with consequences that would bring my past and present into direct collision. Hartford in summer greeted me with familiar humidity and the distant memory of being 17 and adrift. Now, at 22, I returned with purpose. A newly minted architecture degree, a position with the city's economic development department, and a vision for revitalizing the very communities I had once felt excluded from. My apartment was a converted loft in one of the buildings I hoped to help transform, a former textile factory with exposed brick walls, tall windows, and rent that consumed nearly half my municipal salary. It was worth every penny to live inside my own vision, to experience firsthand the potential and challenges of adaptive reuse. Working for the city proved both more frustrating and more educational than I had anticipated. Municipal bureaucracy moved at a glacial pace compared to private firms. Projects required approvals from multiple departments with competing priorities. Community meetings could become battlegrounds between long-term residents fearing displacement and developers promising economic revival. My role as project coordinator for the River North District Revitalization Initiative placed me directly in these crosscurrents. I facilitated meetings, translated between technical experts and neighborhood residents, and helped craft compromise solutions that could move developments forward while protecting community interests. Director James Holloway, who had recruited me, became both mentor and shield, teaching me to navigate political realities while protecting me from the worst bureaucratic obstacles. "You have the technical skills and the community connection," he told me during my first performance review. "What you need to develop is political savvy. In this field, the best design means nothing if you can't get it built." Those words proved prophetic as I worked to implement the first phase of the revitalization plan, converting a vacant department store into a mixed-use development with affordable housing, community facilities, and small business incubator spaces. The project faced opposition from various quarters: historic preservationists concerned about facade modifications, neighborhood activists worried about gentrification, and conservative council members questioning the financial structure. Navigating these conflicts required skills beyond my architectural training. I learned to build coalitions, to identify shared interests among seemingly opposed groups, to translate technical jargon into compelling stories about community benefit. Slowly, project by project, I built credibility with both residents and officials. By the end of my first year, the department store renovation was underway. 2 smaller projects had broken ground, and my revised master plan for the district had received preliminary approval from the city council. I had been promoted to senior project manager with a modest raise that finally made my rent payment less terrifying. Connection with home remained complicated. Mom still called weekly, though the conversations had evolved. She spoke more normally, now, less concerned about Richard overhearing, and occasionally mentioned tensions in her marriage. Emily, now 6, sometimes came on the line to share school stories or ask when I would visit. Questions I deflected gently, unwilling to explain why I wouldn't return to Richard's house. Then came the call that changed everything. "I need to tell." "You something?" Mom said without a preamble one Sunday evening. "Richard's company is in trouble. Major trouble." Richard's pharmaceutical distribution firm had been a source of pride and status for him, the foundation of his sense of superiority. According to Mom, the company had expanded aggressively over the past few years, taking on significant debt to acquire smaller competitors. Then, a major client had filed for bankruptcy, leaving substantial invoices unpaid. Simultaneously, an industry-wide pricing scandal had triggered investigations and public relations damage. "They're laying off staff," Mom continued. "Richard comes home furious every night. He's had to use our savings to keep things afloat, and now he's talking about equity lines on the house." I absorbed this information with complicated emotions. A flicker of vindication quickly replaced by concern for Mom and Emily. "Are you and Emily okay?" I asked. "For now," she answered carefully. "But if things get worse, I might need options." The implicit request hung between us. After 5 years of maintaining distance for my own well-being, Mom was signaling that she might finally be ready to leave Richard, but would need support to do so. "You'll always have options with me," I assured her. "Just say the word." The conversation shifted something fundamental in my outlook. For years, I had been building my career and identity separate from my past with Richard. Now those worlds might collide again, requiring me to actively plan for Mom and Emily's potential needs, rather than maintaining emotional distance. I began researching divorce laws in Connecticut, custody arrangements, support systems for women, leaving controlling relationships. I set aside a portion of each paycheck in a separate account that could help with their transition if needed. I even explored school options for Emily in Hartford should they relocate. Professionally, my second year brought new challenges as Hartford implemented a developer incentive program to accelerate economic growth. The initiative offered tax benefits, expedited approvals, and other advantages to qualified projects in targeted redevelopment zones, including River North District. My role expanded to include evaluating proposals and making recommendations about which projects should receive these valuable incentives. The position carried significant responsibility and placed me in direct contact with major developers and investors seeking opportunities in Hartford's emerging market. One autumn morning, James called me into his office where he sat reviewing a thick proposal document. "Something interesting just came across my desk," he said. "West Haven Capital is bidding on the Riverside Mills property. They're proposing luxury condos and high-end retail. The Riverside Mills complex was the crown jewel of our district, a sprawling former textile factory with historic significance, riverfront access, and tremendous potential for community impact. Our department had been targeting it for a mixed-income housing development with public amenities and workforce development facilities, exactly the type of balanced approach I had advocated for in my thesis. West Haven isn't known for community-oriented development," I noted. "They specialize in upscale properties that maximize investor returns." James slid the proposal across his desk. "Take a look at the executive team." There on the first page, listed as West Haven's Director of Acquisitions, was Richard Harrington. The shock must have registered on my face because James raised his eyebrows. "You know him?" "My former stepfather," I managed, my voice surprisingly steady. "We're not close." James whistled softly. "Well, that's a complication. I can reassign this evaluation if needed." "No," I said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "I can be objective. West Haven's proposal should be judged on its merits, regardless of who's involved." James looked skeptical, but nodded. "Review it thoroughly, then. Your recommendation carries weight, but final decisions involve the whole committee. And Mason? Document everything meticulously." Reading through Richard's proposal was surreal. His writing style was unmistakable, confident to the point of arrogance, dismissive of alternative approaches, focused entirely on prestige and profit. The development concept itself was exactly what our district didn't need: exclusive housing that would accelerate gentrification without addressing community needs or providing affordable options for existing residents. Over the next week, I underwent the most rigorous professional self-examination of my career. Could I truly evaluate this project objectively? Was I capable of separating personal history from professional judgment? What if the proposal actually had merit despite Richard's involvement? I consulted colleagues without revealing my personal connection, studied comparable developments in other cities, and created a detailed analysis framework using quantifiable metrics, percentage of affordable units, projected job creation, integration of public spaces, environmental sustainability features, and projected tax benefits to the city. By every objective measure, West Haven's proposal fell short of competing bids. Their financial projections relied on unrealistic assumptions about market demand for luxury housing in a still transitioning neighborhood. Their community benefits package was minimal compared to other proposals. Their approach to historic preservation was superficial at best. I drafted a thorough evaluation recommending against awarding incentives to West Haven, supporting my conclusion with specific deficiencies and comparative analysis. Before submitting it, I had 2 senior colleagues review my work to ensure I hadn't allowed personal bias to affect my professional judgment. 2 days after submitting my evaluation, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Mason Clark?" The voice was instantly familiar despite the years, the same authoritative tone that had once declared I would amount to nothing. Yes, I replied, my heart rate accelerating despite my efforts to remain calm. This is Richard Harrington. I believe we need to discuss your department's preliminary response to West Haven's proposal. I took a breath. Any communication about the Riverside Mills project should go through official channels. I'm not authorized to discuss evaluations directly with applicants. Don't play bureaucrat with me, Richard snapped. I know exactly who you are and what you're doing. Your rejection recommendation has your personal vendetta written all over it. My evaluation was based entirely on the proposal's merits compared to competing bids, I replied, impressed by my own steady voice. The review committee will make the final determination. Listen carefully. Richard's voice dropped to a threatening whisper. I need this deal. My career depends on it. You have no idea what's at stake. At that moment, I realized that Richard's involvement with West Haven must be his attempt to recover from his company's failure. A career reinvention born of desperation rather than choice. The man who had thrown me out for choosing architecture over business was now scrambling for a foothold in real estate development. I understand the stakes involved in all development decisions, I said carefully. That's why we evaluate each proposal thoroughly against established criteria. If you have additional information that strengthens West Haven's application, I encourage you to submit it through proper channels. There was a long silence before Richard spoke again, his tone shifting from threatening to negotiating. What would it take to change your recommendation? There must be something you want. The implied bribe shocked me, though perhaps it shouldn't have. It revealed how little Richard understood about me or the professional ethics I had developed. This conversation is inappropriate, I stated firmly. Any further communication about this project needs to go through my director. I ended the call and immediately documented the interaction in an email to James, copying the department's legal counsel. Within an hour, I was sitting in the legal department explaining the situation in detail, including my personal history. With Richard, you did everything right, the city attorney assured me. But given the circumstances, we'll need to recuse you from further involvement with this proposal and disclose the conflict to the review committee. The following weeks were tense. Richard attempted to contact me several times through various means, calls from different numbers, an unexpected visit to my office that security intercepted. Even a message passed through a confused-sounding mom asking why I was making trouble for him. Meanwhile, the review committee proceeded with their evaluation of all proposals for Riverside Mills. I remained officially uninvolved, but heard through department channels that West Haven's application continued to compare unfavorably with competitors, particularly a consortium of local developers partnering with a community land trust. Then came news that transformed the situation entirely. West Haven Capital was facing a federal investigation for financial irregularities. The company had apparently misrepresented assets to investors and used questionable accounting practices to conceal mounting debts. Trading of their stock was suspended, and their ability to secure financing for any development became highly questionable. This revelation effectively eliminated West Haven from consideration for the Riverside Mills project. The committee awarded the development rights to the local consortium, whose proposal aligned closely with our district's master plan. The weekend after this decision, Mom called in tears. Richard's being let go from West Haven, she said, her voice shaking. He's furious, blaming everyone but himself. The way he's acting, I don't feel safe, Mason. Neither does Emily. Where are you now? I asked, already reaching for my car keys. At my sister's in New Haven. We left while Richard was meeting with his lawyers. Stay there, I instructed. I'm coming to get you. Both. The 3-hour drive to New Haven gave me time to formulate plans. My apartment was too small for 3 people, but a colleague owned a 2-bedroom rental unit that happened to be vacant between tenants. A quick call secured it for Mom and Emily for the short term. I had enough in savings to cover immediate needs while Mom found work and sorted out legal matters. Arriving at my aunt's house, I found Mom looking older and more fragile than I remembered, while Emily, now 7, regarded me with suspicious curiosity. She had my mother's auburn hair and a wariness that no child her age should possess. "You're my brother," she stated when introduced, neither a question nor a greeting. "I am," I confirmed, kneeling to her eye level. "I've kept all your pictures. Dad says you abandoned us." Her directness was startling. "That's not what happened," I replied gently. "But we have plenty of time to get to know each other now." The drive back to Hartford was filled with Mom's tearful disclosures about the deterioration of her marriage as Richard's professional troubles mounted. His controlling behavior had escalated to emotional abuse and occasional physical intimidation. Emily had begun having anxiety symptoms, including nightmares and fear of male authority figures. "I should have left years ago," Mom admitted, "after how he treated you. I just couldn't see clearly. I thought I needed him." "You don't have to explain," I assured her, though part of me wished she had reached this realization when I was 17 rather than now. "You're doing the right thing now. That's what matters." Settling Mom and Emily into the temporary apartment, I helped them create safety plans, connected Mom with employment resources and legal aid for domestic violence survivors, and began the process of enrolling Emily in local schools. The city's social services department provided additional support, including counseling options for both of them. 2 weeks into this new arrangement, I received an email from Hartford Federal Credit Union regarding a portfolio of distressed mortgages they were selling to recoup losses. As part of my work on housing stability and revitalizing neighborhoods, I had established relationships with several local financial institutions and occasionally received such notices. Scanning the property list attached to the email, one address stopped me cold: 47 Oakmont Drive, Lakeside, Connecticut. Richard's house, the house I had been thrown out of 10 years earlier. Further investigation revealed the extent of Richard's financial collapse. His pharmaceutical company had filed for bankruptcy. West Haven had terminated him when the federal investigation began. He had apparently taken multiple loans against the house to keep his business afloat, then defaulted when his income disappeared. Now the credit union was selling his mortgage at a significant discount to any qualified buyer, willing to take on the risk of a likely foreclosure. The property's value still exceeded the outstanding loan balance, but with the housing market softening and the encumbrances against it, finding a buyer willing to pay full market value would be challenging. As I stared at the listing, a plan began to form, not born from vindictiveness, but from a clear-eyed assessment of opportunities and responsibilities. I had been saving to start my own development consultancy focused on equitable urban renewal. Those funds, combined with a small business loan, would be sufficient to purchase Richard's distressed mortgage. The strategic value was clear. Acquiring the mortgage would give me options. I could work with Richard on a payment plan that might help Mom receive divorce settlement funds. I could ensure Emily had financial support for education. Or, if Richard proved uncooperative, I could proceed with foreclosure and potentially recover more than my investment when the property was sold. I consulted with a real estate attorney to understand all the implications before making my decision. The process would be complex but legal and ethically defensible given my legitimate financial interest in supporting Mom and Emily. After 3 days of deliberation and financial analysis, I submitted an offer for the mortgage. The credit union, eager to remove the non-performing loan from their books, accepted quickly. Within weeks, legal documents arrived making me, officially and irrevocably, the holder of Richard Harrington's mortgage. The significance of this turn of events wasn't lost on me. The man who had thrown me out of his house, confident I would fail without his support, was now at risk of losing that same house unless I chose to work with him. The teenager he had dismissed as worthless now held significant power over his financial future. What Richard didn't yet know What he would discover when I arranged our first meeting as his new creditor was that I had no interest in revenge. My architectural training has taught me that the most elegant solutions address multiple needs simultaneously. The impending confrontation would test whether Richard could recognize the fundamental reversal of our positions and accept the terms I would offer, terms designed not to humiliate him, but to ensure justice and security for my mother and sister. I prepared the formal notification letter. I removed my father's compass pendant from around my neck and held it in my palm. 10 years of navigating challenges had brought me to this unexpected destination, not just financial leverage over Richard, but the opportunity to demonstrate that success could be measured by more than money and power. It could be measured by how one used position and resources to protect those who needed protection. The pendant went back around my neck as I signed the documents. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation that would determine whether Richard had learned anything from his fall from prosperity, and whether I had truly moved beyond defining myself in opposition to him. The Lakeside Country Club hadn't changed. In the decade since I'd last seen it, still projecting exclusivity through manicured lawns and colonial architecture, still serving as the gathering place for the town's elite. I had chosen this location for our meeting deliberately, knowing Richard would feel compelled to maintain appearances here among his peers. I arrived early, selecting a table on the terrace with a view of the golf course. The spring day was perfect, sunny, but cool, rhododendrons blooming along the edges of the property. I ordered coffee and reviewed my documents one final time, ensuring everything was in order for what promised to be a challenging conversation. Richard arrived precisely on time, his punctuality a holdover from more prosperous days. I noticed immediately how the past months had affected him. His hair had more gray, his face more lines, his shoulders less of the rigid confidence that had once seemed permanently affixed to his posture. The tailored suit remained, though I suspected it was from his existing wardrobe rather than newly purchased. Recognition flickered across his face as he approached, surprise quickly masked by the controlled neutrality he had perfected in business dealings. I stood, extending my hand in a professional gesture that subtly established this as a business meeting rather than a personal reckoning. "Mason," he acknowledged, his handshake firm but brief. "You've changed." "It's been 10 years, I replied, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." A server appeared to take Richard's order, Scotch, neat, despite the early hour. We sat in strained silence until the drink arrived and the server retreated. "Your letter was quite a surprise," Richard finally said, lifting his glass but not drinking. "I hadn't realized you'd moved into, what shall we call it, predatory lending?" The attempted barb confirmed he still viewed me through the distorted lens of our past, still unable to imagine I might operate from motives beyond pettiness or greed. It was almost pitiful how little he understood me even now. "I prefer to think of it as asset management," I replied evenly. "Your mortgage represents a stable investment with reasonable upside potential. So this is business, not personal?" His skepticism was palpable. "The acquisition was business," I acknowledged, but I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a personal element to my interest. I opened my portfolio and removed the detailed proposal I had prepared, sliding it across the table. "These are the terms I'm prepared to offer regarding your loan." Richard's eyes narrowed as he skimmed the document. I had structured the proposal conservatively but fairly. Restructured payment terms that would allow him to remain in the house if he chose, but with specific conditions regarding support for Mom and Emily. "This is," he began, then stopped, reading more carefully. His expression shifted from suspicion to confusion. "You're not initiating foreclosure?" "That wouldn't benefit anyone," I explained. "The market's soft, and a foreclosure sale would likely yield less than the outstanding balance. More importantly, it would further complicate Patricia and Emily's situation during an already difficult transition." Richard set down the document, studying me with new intensity. You've been harboring them. I've been supporting my mother and… Sister? I corrected. Something I would have done years ago if circumstances had permitted. He took a long swallow of scotch. Patricia made her choice when she married me. And now she's made a different choice, I replied, my tone remaining neutral despite the flicker of anger his words triggered. The question is whether you're prepared to handle this situation with dignity or whether you prefer a more adversarial approach. Richard leaned back, the defensive posture I remembered so well. You've orchestrated quite a reversal, haven't you? The rejected stepson is now holding the keys to my house. A bitter smile crossed his face. I suppose you've been waiting for this moment of triumph. This isn't about triumph, I said quietly. It's about resolution. What does that mean exactly? I leaned forward, meeting his gaze directly. It means we have an opportunity to end this chapter properly. You provide appropriate support for Emily's education and Patricia's fresh start. I ensure you maintain your home and credit standing. We all move forward separately, but without unnecessary destruction. The frank assessment seemed to penetrate Richard's defensive shell. For perhaps the first time, he looked at me not as the teenager he had dismissed, but as an equal, someone with legitimate authority and considered perspective. Why would you offer this? He asked with genuine confusion in his voice. After everything that happened, you could take the house, push me into bankruptcy. You have every reason to want revenge. Revenge solves nothing, I replied, thinking of the lessons architecture had taught me about creating spaces that serve human needs rather than ego. And it wouldn't undo the past. This approach addresses present realities and future necessities. Richard was silent for a long moment, staring out at the golf course where he had once spent carefree weekends. I wondered what he was seeing. Past. Glories, recent mistakes, potential futures. You know, he said finally, when I told you that you'd amount to nothing, I believed it. Your interest in architecture seemed impractical, sentimental. He looked back at me. I was wrong. The admission, however qualified, surprised me. Richard Harrington acknowledging error was unprecedented in my experience. The world has room for different definitions of success, I offered, neither accepting nor rejecting his quasi-apology. He nodded slowly, then returned his attention to the proposal. These terms regarding Emily's college fund, they're quite specific. She deserves the educational opportunities you would have provided in better circumstances, I explained. The structure ensures the funds are protected regardless of other financial developments. We spent the next hour discussing details, payment schedules, trust arrangements for Emily, property maintenance requirements, consequences for default. Throughout the conversation, I maintained professional detachment, treating this as I would any other negotiation despite the complex emotions running beneath the surface. As we concluded, Richard signed the preliminary agreement and handed it back. I underestimated you, he said. That was my mistake. One of several, I noted, not unkindly. A rueful smile briefly crossed his face. Indeed. He stood, straightening his jacket in a gesture that seemed like muscle memory from more confident days. Will you tell Patricia and Emily that I asked after them? Of course, I replied, though we both knew that simple courtesy wouldn't repair what had been broken. As Richard walked away across the terrace, his posture slightly stupid compared to the ramrod straightness I remembered, I felt an unexpected emotion, not satisfaction or vindication, but a quiet certainty that this resolution was right. The cycle that had begun with rejection and pain was ending with clear boundaries and pragmatic solutions. We had each found our level according to our choices and actions. Back in Hartford that evening, I explained the meeting's outcome to Mom, as we sat at her small kitchen table. Emily was already asleep in the bedroom, exhausted from her first soccer practice with the local youth league. He signed everything? Mom asked, examining the agreement with skeptical eyes. Without a fight? He's in no position to fight, I explained. And I think he recognized that this arrangement is better than the alternatives. Mom set down the papers and reached for my hand. I'm so sorry, Mason. For everything. For not standing up for you when he threw you out. For staying so long afterward. You don't need to apologize, I said, though part of me had needed to hear those words for years. You did what you thought you had to do at the time. But you were just a boy, she insisted, tears forming. My boy. And I failed you. Look at me, Mom, I said gently. Do I look like a failure to you? Everything that happened led me here, to a career I love, to the strength to help you and Emily when you needed it. She smiled through her tears. When did you get so wise? I had a good foundation, I replied, squeezing her hand. And I learned a lot about building on difficult terrain. The double meaning made her laugh, breaking the tension of the moment. We spent the rest of the evening discussing practical matters, her job prospects as a returning nurse, Emily's adjustment to her new school, the apartment they would move into next month when my colleague's temporary rental ended. The following weeks brought unexpected developments. Richard, perhaps motivated by the structured agreement or simply accepting changed realities, met all initial obligations promptly. He provided signed consent for Emily's school transfer, made the first payments into her education fund, and even forwarded personal items Mom had left behind during her hasty departure. Meanwhile, my professional circumstances evolved rapidly. The successful community-driven development at Riverside Mills had attracted positive attention from urban planners nationally. My role in facilitating that project led to speaking invitations at planning conferences and urban development forums. James called me into his office on a warm June morning, closing the door with unusual formality. I've received an interesting proposal, he began, from Alexis Parnell. The name immediately registered, the founder of Parnell Urban Initiatives who had approached me after my thesis presentation years earlier. Her firm is establishing a Hartford office focused on community-centered development, James continued. She specifically requested you to head it. The opportunity was precisely what I had been working toward, a chance to implement my vision for equitable urban renewal on a larger scale, backed by a firm with resources and aligned values. This would be a loss for our department, James acknowledged, but a gain for the city. Parnell's approach complements our public sector efforts. You'd be in a position to accomplish things we can't due to bureaucratic constraints. The decision wasn't difficult. Within a month, I had transitioned to my new role as Hartford Director for Parnell Urban Initiatives. The position came with significantly increased compensation, allowing me to establish a more permanent living situation, a modest 3-bedroom townhouse in a developing neighborhood where Mom and Emily could have their own space while sharing common areas. Our unconventional family arrangement evolved naturally. Mom found work at Hartford Memorial, gradually rebuilding her nursing career. Emily, initially withdrawn and wary, began flourishing in her new environment, making friends, excelling in school, developing an interest in science that Mom encouraged wholeheartedly. On weekends, I often took Emily to architectural landmarks around the city, explaining design principles in terms a 7-year-old could understand. She absorbed everything with surprising interest, asking questions that sometimes challenged even my professional knowledge. Why do buildings have to be boxes? She asked once, looking up at downtown's rectangular skyline. Couldn't they be curves or triangles? They absolutely can, I replied, delighted by her perspective. Some of the most interesting buildings in the world break away from standard shapes. These conversations became our bonding ritual, establishing a relationship independent of our complicated family history. Emily never called me brother directly, but she began to refer to me that way when talking to her friends, a small acknowledgement that meant more than she could know. Richard remained peripheral but present through regular payments and occasional communications regarding Emily's activities. He never requested visits, perhaps recognizing that rebuilding that relationship would require time and changed behavior on his part. The mortgage arrangement proceeded smoothly until early autumn, when Richard unexpectedly requested a meeting at my office. He arrived looking healthier than at our country club encounter, his posture straighter, his manner less defensive. "I've accepted a position with a pharmaceutical distributor in Chicago," he announced without preamble. "It's a step down from my previous role, but it's a fresh start in a market where my reputation isn't compromised." This news was unexpected, but logical. Hartford held too many reminders of his professional collapse. Chicago offered anonymity and distance from local scrutiny. "What about the house?" I asked, immediately considering implications for our agreement. "That's why I'm here," Richard replied. "I'd like to sell it. The market's improving, and carrying an empty property makes little financial sense." He was right, of course. From a business perspective, selling the house would benefit everyone, generating proceeds that could resolve the mortgage, potentially fund the remainder of Emily's education account, and provide a cleaner separation between Richard's new life and the family he had left behind. "I'll need to review the numbers," I said. "But in principle, I have no objection. Have you discussed this with Patricia?" "I thought you should be the first to know, given your position as lender," Richard replied. "But I'll contact her legal representative this week." As he prepared to leave, Richard hesitated at the door. "Your office." He gestured to the architectural drawings and community engagement photos lining the walls. "It's impressive. The work you're doing here matters." Coming from him, this acknowledgement, simple but sincere, represented a significant shift. The man who had once dismissed architecture as impractical was recognizing its tangible impact on communities and lives. "Thank you," I said simply. "Good luck in Chicago." The sale of the lakeside house proceeded efficiently over the following months. The improving real estate market yielded a price that covered the outstanding mortgage balance with surplus funds that were divided according to divorce settlement terms. Emily's education fund was fully established as an irrevocable trust, ensuring her college expenses would be covered regardless of future circumstances. On the day of closing, I drove to Lakeside for the final walkthrough. Standing in the empty house where so much of my youth had unfolded, I felt a strange sense of completion. The rooms seemed smaller than in memory, the imposing facade less intimidating. It was just a house now, bricks and timber, windows and floors, soon to become home to another family with their own story to write. In the foyer where Richard had delivered his final condemnation a decade earlier, I paused. The angry teenager who had stood in this spot, duffel bag at his feet, could never have imagined the journey ahead. The challenges overcome, skills developed, perspective gained. That version of me had defined success as proving Richard wrong. This version understood that true success lay in building something meaningful rather than tearing something down. I closed the door for the final time, the symbolic weight of the action bringing unexpected lightness. Driving back to Hartford, I found myself thinking not about the past, but about the future. Projects in development, opportunities for expansion, ways to scale our community-centered approach to other struggling neighborhoods. The following spring brought another transition when Mom moved into her own apartment, a sunny one-bedroom in a converted school building our firm had recently completed. The space gave her independence while keeping her close enough for regular family dinners and Emily's frequent overnight stays with her. "It's time for me to stand on my own," she explained as I helped assemble IKEA furniture in her new living room. "For too long, I defined myself through relationships: wife, mother, nurse. I need to figure out who Patricia is when she's just herself." I understood completely. My own identity had evolved from rejected stepson to accomplished professional through similar self-discovery. "The place suits you," I observed, looking around at the high ceilings and abundant natural light. It feels like a fresh start. For all of us, Mom agreed. Even Richard, in his way. Our last update had indicated Richard was adapting to Chicago, his new position offering stability, if not the prestige he had once enjoyed. He maintained minimal contact, sending Emily birthday and Christmas gifts with brief notes. It was a distant relationship, but no longer an actively harmful one. That summer, Parnell Urban Initiatives expanded operations to include 3 additional cities, with Hartford serving as the model for community-engaged development. As the firm's I/O success grew, so did my responsibilities and influence. By year's end, I had been promoted to regional director, overseeing projects across the Northeast with a team of like-minded architects, planners, and community specialists. The 10th anniversary of the night Richard had thrown me out passed without conscious acknowledgement. It was Emily who inadvertently marked the occasion, presenting me with a handmade card after Sunday dinner. "What's this for?" I asked, opening the envelope. "Ms. Rodriguez had us write about heroes for school," she explained, suddenly shy. "I wrote about you, how you build things that help people, how you helped Mom and me when we needed it." Inside was a childish drawing of me standing beside a building, rays of sun extending from the windows. Beneath it, in carefully formed letters, "Thank you for showing me that mean people don't win in the end." The simple wisdom of her observation struck me deeply. The story that had begun with rejection had transformed into something neither Richard nor I could have predicted. Not a tale of revenge or triumph, but of growth, responsibility, and ultimately, freedom from the past that had once defined us. Both. That evening, after Emily had gone to bed, I sat on my balcony looking out at Hartford's skyline, at buildings I had helped shape, communities I had helped strengthen. The compass pendant that had guided me through tumultuous years rested against my chest, a reminder of both where I had come from and how far I had traveled. The journey that began in rain and uncertainty had led to this moment of clarity and purpose. Richard had been wrong about many things, but perhaps most fundamentally about what constitutes success. It isn't measured in money or status, in houses owned or mortgages held. It's measured in lives impacted, communities built, and the capacity to transform even painful rejection into meaningful direction. As city lights illuminated the structures that represented years of collective effort and vision, I felt profound gratitude for every step of the path, even the painful beginning, that had set everything in motion. Without that critical moment of rejection, I might never have discovered my true capability or purpose. The compass had guided me here, to this place of creation rather than destruction, of building rather than breaking. And in that realization was the most complete victory imaginable, not over Richard, but over the limitations he had tried to impose. The story that began with, "You'll never amount to anything," had become a testament to possibility, resilience, and the power to define success on one's own terms. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Mason Clark, recipient of this year's Urban Vision Award. The applause echoed through the grand ballroom of the National Building Museum in Washington, D.C., as I approached the podium. Looking out at the sea of faces, architects, urban planners, developers, community activists, I felt a moment of surreal detachment. 15 years ago, I had stood on a rain-soaked sidewalk with nowhere to go. Now, I stood before industry leaders as they recognized our firm's innovative approach to equitable urban development. "Thank you," I began, adjusting the microphone. "This award belongs not just to me, but to everyone at Parnell Clark Initiatives, who believes that architecture should serve communities, not just clients." The rebranding of the firm last year, adding my name alongside Alexis Parnell's, had marked a significant milestone in my professional evolution from employee to partner. Our expansion to 12 cities across the country had transformed what began as a boutique firm into a recognized leader in community-centered development. When I was 17, I continued, I learned a painful lesson about homes and power. A house is more than shelter. It's security, identity, belonging. When you lose that foundation, you understand viscerally why creating equitable housing matters. I hadn't planned to reference my personal history, but standing there, it suddenly seemed essential to connect the professional achievement being celebrated to the experiences that had shaped my approach to architecture and community development. Our neighborhood equity initiative began with a simple question. How can we transform urban spaces without displacing the people who give those spaces life and character? The answer wasn't simple, but it was clear, by placing community voices at the center of the design process, by ensuring affordable housing remains accessible even as areas develop, by creating economic opportunities alongside physical improvements. I described our flagship projects, the Hartford River North District, the South Bronx Cultural Corridor, the Chicago West Side Revival. I spotted Mom and Emily in the audience, seated alongside Alexis Parnell and James Holloway, my former director, who had become a close friend and occasional collaborator. Emily, now 12, beamed with pride, while Mom dabbed discreetly at her eyes. Architecture at its best doesn't impose vision from above, it nurtures potential from within, I concluded. Thank you for this recognition, which honors not just design excellence but the communities who trusted us with their neighborhoods and their futures. The reception afterward buzzed with conversations about policy initiatives, funding mechanisms, and technical innovations. I moved through the crowd, engaging with colleagues and potential partners, discussing possibilities for collaboration on upcoming projects. Congratulations, a familiar voice said from behind me. I turned to find Taylor Reynolds, my first professional mentor, now silver-haired but still commanding in his bespoke suit. I always knew you'd make an impact, but I underestimated the scale. We embraced warmly. You gave me my first real opportunity, I reminded him. Without that scholarship and those internships, none of this would have been possible. Taylor waved away the acknowledgement. I recognized talent and provided access. You did the real work. He glanced around the elegant space. I'm semi-retired now, primarily consulting on special projects. But I'm intrigued by your Baltimore proposal. Perhaps we could discuss potential involvement? Our conversation was interrupted by Emily, who approached with the confident directness that had become her hallmark. Mom says we need to leave soon, if we're going to make our train, she announced, then extended her hand to Taylor with practiced poise. I'm Emily Harrington Clark. Taylor shook her hand with matching formality. Taylor Reynolds. I've heard wonderful things about you from your brother. Emily beamed at this adult recognition. In the years since she and Mom had left Richard, she had blossomed from a wary child into a self-assured preteen with passionate interests in both science and art. Last year, after extended discussion and with Richard's surprisingly cooperative participation in the legal process, she had officially hyphenated her surname, a choice that recognized both her history and her present family configuration. Are you an architect too? She asked Taylor. A developer, he corrected. I help turn architectural visions into reality by finding the money to build them. Emily nodded seriously. That makes sense. Mason says great ideas stay on paper without proper financing. Taylor laughed. He's absolutely right. And speaking of financing, Mason, let's schedule time next week to discuss Baltimore. As Taylor moved away to greet other colleagues, Mom joined us, elegant in the navy dress she had purchased specially for the occasion. At 54, she had found her stride professionally and personally, returning to nursing with renewed purpose, developing new interests and friendships, even cautiously dating occasionally, though she remained happily independent. That speech was beautiful, she said, hugging me tightly. Your father would have been so proud. The mention of Dad still carried emotional weight, but no longer the sharp pain of earlier years. Time had transformed grief into a gentler appreciation for his influence. the creativity and resilience he had passed down, the example of principled work he had set during his brief life. "Let's head back to the hotel," I suggested. "We can order room service and plan tomorrow's sightseeing before your train." Mom and Emily had traveled from Hartford for the award ceremony, their first visit to Washington. We had arranged an extended weekend to explore the capital's architectural landmarks and museums before they returned home, and I continued to our Baltimore office for project meetings. Later that evening, after Mom had retired to her connecting room, Emily and I sat by the hotel window overlooking the illuminated monuments of the National Mall. She had been uncharacteristically quiet since returning from the ceremony. "Everything okay?" I asked. "You seemed to enjoy meeting everyone earlier." She nodded, then hesitated. "I got an email from Dad today. He wants me to visit him in Chicago this summer." Richard's communication with Emily had evolved over the years, from formal birthday and holiday acknowledgments to more regular email exchanges and occasional video calls. The relationship remained tentative, but he had made consistent efforts to maintain connection while respecting boundaries. "How do you feel about that?" I asked carefully. Emily twisted a strand of auburn hair, a gesture inherited from Mom that emerged when she was processing complex emotions. "I'm curious," she admitted. "I have these memories of him, but they don't fit together right. Sometimes he was nice, reading me stories or taking me for ice cream. Other times he was scared when he got angry, especially about you." Her direct reference to the family fracture was typical of her approach to difficult topics, straightforward, seeking understanding rather than avoiding discomfort. "People are complicated," I acknowledged. "Richard made serious mistakes, especially in how he treated you and Mom toward the end. But visiting doesn't mean forgetting those things. It just means giving him a chance to show who he is now." "Would you be mad if I went?" she asked, her voice smaller suddenly, more childlike than her usual confident tone. "Absolutely not," I assured her. "You have every right to know your father. Mom and I will support whatever relationship you want to have with him, as long as it's healthy and respectful." Relief crossed her face. "I told him maybe, but I wanted to talk to you first." She paused. "He asks about you sometimes, if you're still doing well." This revelation surprised me. In the 5 years since the house sale and Richard's relocation to Chicago, our communication had been limited to necessary financial and legal matters regarding Emily's trust fund. The idea that he inquired about my welfare suggested an evolution I hadn't anticipated. "What do you tell him?" I asked. "That you're awesome at your job and that you take me to cool buildings and explain how they work," she replied with a smile. "And that you make terrible pancakes, but Mom says it's the thought that counts." I laughed at the accurate assessment of my limited culinary skills. "Fair enough. If I go to Chicago," Emily continued, thinking aloud, "maybe I could see some of the architecture there. You're always saying it's an important city for skyscrapers." "It absolutely is," I confirmed. "The first modern skyscrapers were built there after the Great Fire. I could give you a list of buildings to check out." Our conversation drifted to architecture and city planning, Emily asking increasingly sophisticated questions about urban design principles. Her interest had deepened over years of our weekend architectural tours, developing from casual curiosity into genuine engagement with spatial concepts and their social implications. "You know," she said as our conversation wound down, "I'm thinking about becoming an architect too, or maybe an environmental engineer, something that builds things that help people." "You'd be excellent at either," I told her, meaning it. Her combination of scientific aptitude and creative thinking suited both fields perfectly. The following day, exploring the National Building Museum with Emily and Mom, I found myself reflecting on the circuitous path that had led to this moment. The painful rupture that began our journey had ultimately created space for new growth and unexpected connections. Mom had reclaimed her independence, Emily was developing her own identity with support from multiple sources, and I had found purpose in transforming urban landscapes and communities. Even Richard, from the limited updates Emily shared, seemed to be reconstructing a more balanced life, his Chicago position offering stability without the pressure cooker status seeking that had characterized his earlier career. The distance and separate lives had perhaps allowed him, too, to evolve beyond the rigid, controlling person he had been. That evening, after seeing Mom and Emily off at Union Station for their train back to Hartford, I received an unexpected email from Dr. Raymond Walsh, my high school literature teacher who had provided shelter during those critical months before graduation. Now in his late 70s and retired, he rarely used digital communication, making the message particularly notable. "Dear Mason," he wrote, "I hope this finds you well. I recently saw your name in an architectural journal at the library and was delighted to learn of your success and your community-focused approach to development. It confirms what I observed in you as a young man. Resilience coupled with empathy, a powerful combination." His note continued with updates about his life, downsizing to a smaller home after his beloved basset hounds passed away, volunteering with literacy programs, maintaining connections with a few former students who had stayed in touch. "The drafting tools that belonged to Elizabeth's brother," he concluded, "I've often wondered if they were of any use to you on your journey. Either way, I'm gratified to have played some small role in supporting your path forward during a difficult time. With continued admiration, Raymond Walsh." The reference to those drafting tools, my first real architectural equipment, received when I had nothing, brought unexpected emotion. I had used them throughout college, only retiring them when digital design tools became standard professional practice. They remained carefully preserved in my office, a tangible reminder of early kindness that had helped redirect my course. The next morning, before my Baltimore meetings, I found myself walking through a revitalizing neighborhood near the hotel. Exactly the kind of area where our firm now focused development efforts. The street featured a mix of historic buildings undergoing rehabilitation, alongside thoughtfully designed new structures that complemented rather than overwhelmed the existing fabric. Passing a construction site where workers were carefully restoring an ornate brick facade while reinforcing the internal structure, I stopped to watch the precision of their efforts. The project exemplified our firm's philosophy, honoring architectural heritage while creating functional spaces for contemporary needs, preserving neighborhood character while enhancing livability. My phone buzzed with a text from Alexis Parnell. "Baltimore team eager for your input on community center design. Bringing in local artists as discussed?" "Absolutely," I replied. "Their involvement is crucial for authentic placemaking. We'll discuss implementation details this morning." This integration of local creative voices into design processes has become a hallmark of our approach, recognizing that meaningful spaces emerge from collaborative creation rather than isolated expertise. It was precisely the kind of inclusive methodology I had envisioned as a student, but had refined and expanded through years of professional practice. Later that week, back in my Hartford office, I received an unexpected letter with a Chicago return address. The envelope contained no message, only a newspaper clipping, an article about our firm's innovative approach to equitable development, with my award acceptance speech quoted at length. In the margin, in handwriting I recognized immediately, was a brief note. "You built something significant. Credit where due. R.H." The acknowledgement, understated but genuine, represented a final evolution in our complicated relationship. Not reconciliation or friendship, but a mature recognition across the distance we would always maintain. Richard had been wrong about where my path would lead, but perhaps right that the world required both pragmatism and vision, a balance I had ultimately found in my own way. That weekend, I visited a site in Hartford's North End where our newest project was taking shape, a community innovation center providing technology access, educational resources, and entrepreneurial support for neighborhood residents. The facility represented years of collaborative planning with local organizations, careful financing through a combination of public funds and social impact investment, and architectural design that honored the area's cultural heritage. Walking through the partially completed structure, I could already envision the finished spaces filled with activity. Students using digital resources unavailable at home, resident entrepreneurs developing business plans, community groups gathering. For cultural and educational events, this tangible manifestation of possibility rising from what had been a vacant, deteriorating property embodied everything I had come to believe about architecture's potential. My phone chimed with a message from Emily. Found awesome architecture. Books at library. Can we visit that sustainable building downtown tomorrow? The one with the green roof and solar panels? Absolutely, I replied. Meet you at Mom's at 10. Bring your sketchbook. Her enthusiasm for our architectural explorations had become one of life's consistent joys. Whether she ultimately pursued architecture professionally or simply maintained it as an informed interest, the shared language of design had become a meaningful connection between us, one based not on the complicated family history we had navigated, but on genuine shared passion. That evening, sitting on my balcony watching twilight transform Hartford's skyline, I reflected on the strange symmetry of life's trajectories. 15 years earlier, Richard had declared I would amount to nothing, setting in motion a journey neither of us could have anticipated. The angry, wounded teenager standing in the rain could never have imagined this future, not just professional success, but the deeper accomplishments of balanced perspective, meaningful work, and genuine connection. The compass pendant that had guided me through tumultuous years now rested in a small display box on my desk rather than around my neck, a cherished memento rather than a necessary talisman. Its purpose had been fulfilled. I had found my direction and no longer needed physical reminders to maintain course. As city lights illuminated the structures that represented collective vision and effort, I felt profound gratitude for the complete journey, rejection and struggle, achievement and recognition, and most importantly, the evolution beyond defining success in opposition to others' expectations. The greatest victory hadn't been acquiring Richard's mortgage or achieving professional acclaim, but developing the capacity to create rather than merely respond, to build future possibilities rather than react to past wounds. The story that began, with "You'll amount to nothing," had transformed into a testament to the most significant measurement of success: the ability to contribute meaningfully to others' lives while continuing to grow and evolve through one's own. That legacy, expressed through transformed urban spaces, strengthened communities, and personal connections based on genuine understanding, represented achievement that no mortgage deed or award could fully capture. Tomorrow would bring new projects, challenges, and opportunities. The path forward remained as it had always been, one step at a time, guided by principles refined through experience, open to continued growth and unexpected possibilities. The greatest adventures, after all, unfold not when we definitively prove others wrong, but when we continually discover how to prove ourselves right. The snow fell gently outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office on the 22nd floor of the Clark Parnell Tower, the most recent addition to Hartford's skyline and our firm's new headquarters. At 45, I found winter held a different kind of beauty than it had in my youth. Less about pristine landscapes and more about the quiet reflection it inspired, the subtle reminder that even dormant seasons served essential purposes in life's cycles. The Dixon Community Center models just arrived, my assistant Julian announced, wheeling in a cart with 3 architectural models of varying scales. The fabrication team outdid themselves. The models represented our firm's most ambitious project to date, a comprehensive community development in South Chicago, combining affordable housing, educational facilities, healthcare services, and green spaces designed to transform a long-neglected neighborhood. The project held particular significance for me beyond its scale or innovation. "They're remarkable," I agreed, examining the detailed craftsmanship. "Let's display them in the conference room for tomorrow's presentation." As Julian arranged the models, I noticed a text message from Emily. Flight landed. Heading to the hotel, then dinner at 7. Perfect, I replied. Reservation confirmed at Vesuvio's. Can't wait to hear all about the fellowship results. At 22, Emily had grown into a formidable young woman, brilliant, principled, and determined. After graduating with dual degrees in architecture and environmental engineering from MIT, she had spent the past year applying for prestigious research fellowships focused on climate-adaptive design solutions for vulnerable coastal communities. Our relationship had evolved from the careful connection of her childhood to a genuine friendship and professional collegiality. She had interned with our firm during undergraduate summers but had deliberately sought different mentors for her graduate studies, establishing her own identity in the field while maintaining our family bond. One more thing, Julian said, pausing, at the door. Richard Harrington called while you were in the budget meeting. He asked if you could call him back when convenient. He said it wasn't urgent, but personal. The mention of Richard's name still carried a certain weight, though no longer the emotional charge it once had. Over the 15 years since he had relocated to Chicago, our communication had shifted from strictly formal legal matters regarding Emily's education trust to occasional brief exchanges as Emily built her own relationship with him. Thanks, Julian. I'll call him this afternoon. After completing a conference call with our Baltimore office, I found myself with an unexpected half-hour window before my next meeting. Curious about Richard's unusual direct contact, I dialed his number. Mason, he answered on the second ring. Thank you for returning my call. Of course, I replied. Julian mentioned it was personal? Yes. There was a pause, the faint sound of papers being shuffled. I've been following news about your South Chicago project, the Dixon Community Center. This surprised me. Though Richard had acknowledged my professional accomplishments in that single margin note years ago, he had never shown specific interest in our firm's projects. It's an important initiative, I said neutrally. Comprehensive community development, with significant potential impact. It's in my neighborhood, Richard replied. Or near enough. I've watched that area struggle for years. Your approach seems thoughtful. The hesitation in his voice suggested this conversation was difficult for him, perhaps because it required acknowledging my expertise in an area he had once dismissed. The project partners reached out to us based on our track record with similar developments, I explained. We've spent 18 months on community engagement to ensure the design truly serves resident needs. That's actually why I called, Richard said. I've developed some connections with local business associations through my pharmaceutical work. They've been looking for meaningful ways to invest in community development. Your project might align with their interests. This unexpected overture, Richard essentially offering to facilitate business relationships for our Chicago project, represented a significant evolution in our dynamic. It suggested not just acknowledgement of my professional standing, but active support for work he recognized as valuable. I'd be interested in exploring those connections, I said carefully. Our Community Economic Development Director, Tariq Washington, leads those partnerships. I can have him contact you to discuss possibilities. That would be fine, Richard agreed. And Mason, Emily mentioned she's having dinner with you tonight. Please extend my best wishes for her fellowship applications. Her work on flood-resistant housing solutions is quite impressive. The genuine pride in his voice when speaking of Emily reflected another dimension of his evolution. Over the years, he had rebuilt a relationship with her characterized by respect for her independence and admiration for her accomplishments, a stark contrast to the controlling approach he had taken with me. I'll pass that along, I promised. She values your support. After ending the call, I found myself contemplating the strange symmetry of life's patterns. The South Chicago project that had prompted Richard's outreach was, in many ways, the culmination of principles I had first explored in my college thesis, the very architectural pursuits he had once deemed worthless. Now those same approaches were potentially benefiting his adopted community, creating an unexpected connection between our separate paths. That evening, over dinner with Emily at Vesuvio's, I mentioned Richard's call after we had covered her fellowship, interviews, and recent developments in her research. "He actually called you directly?" she asked, surprised. "That's new." Emily had maintained a carefully balanced relationship with Richard over the years. Annual summer visits to Chicago during her teens, regular communication without excessive attachment, clear boundaries when needed. She had navigated the complexity of their relationship with remarkable maturity, neither dismissing him entirely nor ignoring the problematic history. "He seems genuinely impressed with your work," I told her. His pride came through clearly. Emily smiled, twirling pasta thoughtfully. "He's changed a lot since I was little. The corporate collapse was probably the best thing that ever happened to him, though he'd never admit it. Losing everything forced him to recalibrate what actually matters." "And what does he think matters now?" I asked, curious about her perspective given her more consistent contact with him. "Relationships, primarily. His second marriage is different, more partnership, less control. He's involved with community organizations, mentors young professionals." She shrugged. "He'll never be warm or demonstrative, but he's learned to value connection over status." This assessment aligned with the subtle shifts I'd observed in our limited interactions over the years. The Richard who had thrown me out for choosing architecture over business had been consumed by rigid definitions of success and worth. The Richard who now offered business connections for our community development projects had discovered different measures of value. "Speaking of recalibrating priorities," Emily continued, setting down her fork with uncharacteristic hesitation, "I need to tell you something important. I've decided not to pursue the Wilton Fellowship, even if it's offered." This was unexpected news. The Wilton was the most prestigious of the fellowships she had applied for, offering substantial funding and access to international research opportunities. "That's a significant decision," I observed. "You seemed excited about their global climate resilience focus when we last discussed it." Emily nodded. "I was. Their resources are incredible. But I've been reflecting on what I really want my work to accomplish, and..." She took a deep breath. "I've accepted a position with Habitat for Humanity's disaster response team. Lower profile, definitely lower salary, but immediate impact in vulnerable communities." The alignment of her choice with values I recognized in myself, prioritizing meaningful impact over professional prestige, created a moment of profound connection across the table. Without saying it directly, Emily was defining success in terms that reflected the journey I had navigated over decades. "I think that's an excellent decision," I said sincerely. "If my experience has taught me anything, it's that alignment between your work and your core values creates the most sustainable satisfaction." Emily's expression relaxed. "I was worried you might be disappointed. Wilton would have been impressive on paper." "Paper accomplishments fade," I replied. "The changes you'll help create in actual communities endure." Our conversation shifted to practical matters, where she would be based initially, New Orleans, the scope of her responsibilities, designing rapid deployment housing systems with local materials, and potential collaboration opportunities with our firm's disaster response initiatives. As we finished dinner, Emily mentioned casually, "I told Dad about the Habitat position yesterday. He was surprisingly supportive, said something about how meaning matters more than status in the long run." She smiled wryly. "Apparently he's been reading philosophy in his retirement." Richard had semi-retired 2 years earlier, maintaining a part-time consulting role while exploring interests he had previously dismissed as impractical. Art appreciation, community theater board participation, even creative writing classes at the local community college. These pursuits would have been unimaginable for the status-driven man who had once dominated our household. "People can change when life forces reconsideration," I noted. "Not everyone does, but it's always possible." Walking back to my car after dinner, I found myself reflecting on the long, complex journey that had connected all of us in ways none could have anticipated when Richard uttered those fateful words, "You'll never amount to anything." The following morning brought the major presentation of our Dixon Community Center project to key stakeholders, including city officials, community representatives, and potential funding partners. Our team had prepared exhaustively, creating compelling visualizations, detailed financial projections, and clear implementation timelines. As I guided the presentation alongside our Chicago project director, I was struck by how naturally the process flowed. The integration of community voices into design decisions, the balance of social impact with financial sustainability, the thoughtful adaptation of architectural solutions to specific neighborhood needs. These approaches had once been aspirational theories in my college thesis. Now they were our firm's established methodology, refined through years of practical application. The phased implementation ensures community services become available, while housing components are still under construction, I explained, indicating the timeline. This creates immediate benefits while building toward comprehensive neighborhood transformation. The community representatives nodded approvingly. They had been integral to developing this approach through extensive workshops and feedback sessions. Their ownership of the process was evident in the confident questions they posed and the specific improvements they highlighted. Following the presentation, as stakeholders mingled during the reception, I noticed a message from Tariq Washington, our Community Economic Development Director. Productive call with R. Harrington, promising connections with 3 business associations interested in workforce development components. Meeting scheduled next week. Details to follow. Richard had followed through, leveraging his business relationships to support our project. The simple act represented a closure of sorts, a full-circle moment where the architectural career he had once dismissed as worthless was now creating value he actively endorsed. Later that afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor in my office, Dr. Raymond Walsh, now in his early 80s but still maintaining the dignified bearing and sharp intellect that had characterized him as my literature teacher and temporary guardian during those critical months before college. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, leaning slightly on a wooden cane as Julian showed him in. "I was downtown for a medical appointment and thought I might catch you." "Dr. Walsh," I greeted him warmly, coming around my desk to offer him the most comfortable chair. "You're never an interruption. It's wonderful to see you." In recent years, our connection has strengthened through regular lunch meetings and occasional collaboration on educational initiatives supported by our firm's community foundation. His perspective on literature and philosophy had influenced our approach to placemaking, understanding neighborhoods as narratives with histories and potential futures, respecting the stories embedded in communities where we worked. "I've been following news of your Chicago project," he said, settling into the chair. "Quite ambitious, comprehensive in scale and approach." "We've assembled an exceptional team," I acknowledged. "The community partners are particularly engaged." Dr. Walsh nodded appreciatively. "I remember your early sketches at my dining room table, always considering how spaces would affect people's lives, not just how they would look. You've built that perspective into an entire organization now." His observation captured perfectly the through line from those tentative beginnings to our current work. A consistent belief in architecture's potential to serve human needs and strengthen communities. "I've been reflecting lately," Dr. Walsh continued, his voice taking on the thoughtful rhythm I remembered from late evening conversations in his study, "on trajectories and transformations. How moments that seem disastrous sometimes create openings for previously unimagined possibilities." The philosophical turn was characteristic of him, and I settled in to listen, knowing his observations would be worth hearing. When you arrived at my door with Mrs. Abernathy, I saw a young man in crisis, talented but wounded, determined but understandably angry. What I couldn't have predicted was how completely you would transform that moment of rejection into a foundation for creating spaces where others feel welcomed and valued. His words crystallized something I had sensed but never articulated so clearly: that the experience of exclusion had ultimately shaped my commitment to creating inclusive environments and opportunities. "The greatest victory," Dr. Walsh continued, "isn't that you proved Richard wrong about your potential. It's that you developed a vision entirely independent of his limited perspective, one that benefits people he never considered worth considering." The profound accuracy of this assessment, identifying the evolution beyond reaction to autonomous creation, touched something essential in my understanding of my own journey. "Your work doesn't simply succeed by conventional metrics," he added. "It redefines the metrics themselves. That's a rarer and more meaningful accomplishment." Our conversation continued, touching on his recent experiences mentoring students from disadvantaged backgrounds, my plans for our firm's educational foundation, and shared memories of those months in his guest room that had provided crucial stability during upheaval. After Dr. Walsh departed for his medical appointment, I found myself drawn to the wall of my office where I displayed select mementos from my professional and personal journey, architectural awards, significant project renderings, and a few carefully chosen personal items. Among them was a shadow box containing the drafting tools Dr. Walsh had given me from his late wife's brother, my first real architectural equipment, preserved now as a tangible reminder of early kindness that had helped redirect my course. Beside it hung my father's compass pendant, no longer needed as daily guidance but honored as the symbol that had helped navigate difficult terrain. These artifacts connected past to present, tracing a path from the frightened 17-year-old standing in the rain to the established professional whose work was transforming communities across multiple cities. The journey between those points had never been linear, but its winding course had created opportunities for growth and perspective impossible in a more direct progression. That evening, returning to my downtown apartment with its expansive views of the city I had helped reshape, I found an email from Mom with the subject line, "Thought you might want to see this." The attached document was a scan of a newspaper clipping from the Lakeside Community Chronicle, a small announcement that Oakmont Properties, Richard's former development company, had filed for bankruptcy protection following years of financial mismanagement by its current leadership. The brief article noted that the company's founder, Richard Harrington, had sold his interest in the firm a decade earlier before relocating to Chicago, where he had established a successful second career in pharmaceutical distribution. The company's subsequent decline under new ownership had culminated in its current financial collapse. Mom's accompanying message was simple: "Saw this and realized how differently things might have turned out if you had followed the path he demanded. Grateful every day for your courage and vision. Love always, Mom." The notification represented a final validation of the fork in the road 15 years earlier, the critical decision to pursue architecture despite Richard's ultimatum. Had I acquiesced to his demands and entered business on his terms, I might well have found myself entangled in the very failure described in the article. Instead, that moment of rejection had initiated a journey through architecture school, mentorship, relationships, professional development, and ultimately the creation of a firm whose work was transforming neighborhoods and lives across multiple cities. The contrast couldn't have been more stark or more affirming. Mom, now in her 60s and thriving in her own balanced life, had recognized this significance immediately. Her nursing career had evolved into a leadership role in community health education, work that brought her deep satisfaction and purpose. Her relationship with Emily had strengthened as they both developed professional identities and shared interests. My phone chimed with a message from Alexis Parnell, my business partner of 8 years. Chicago City Council approved our proposal unanimously. Full funding package confirmed. We break ground in March. This final approval for the Dixon Community Center meant our most ambitious project would proceed on schedule, creating housing, services, and opportunities in a neighborhood that had experienced decades of disinvestment and neglect. The impact would extend beyond physical structures to community strength, economic opportunity, and renewed hope. I stepped onto my balcony despite the winter chill, looking out at Hartford's skyline where several of our firm's projects were visible. The adaptive reuse of the historic Riverside Mills complex, the mixed-income housing development that had revitalized the North End, the Innovation Center providing technology access and entrepreneurial support to underserved communities. Each represented not just architectural achievement, but the tangible manifestation of values that had crystallized through my journey. That spaces shape lives, that communities deserve input into their environments, that development should create opportunity rather than displacement. The teenage version of me, standing in the rain with nowhere to go, could never have imagined this future. Not just the professional success and recognition, but the deeper satisfaction of meaningful work aligned with core values, of relationships based on mutual respect rather than power dynamics, of creating rather than simply reacting. As snowflakes began to fall more heavily, illuminated by city lights into momentary constellations before dissolving, I reflected on the strange alchemy by which rejection had ultimately created opportunity, how a moment intended to limit possibilities had instead expanded them beyond what anyone could have predicted. Richard's declaration that I would amount to nothing had initiated a journey to define something on my own terms, not through wealth accumulation or status signaling, but through tangible contribution to spaces and communities that strengthened human connection and opportunity. Emily's evolution represented the next chapter of this redefinition, her choice to apply her considerable talents to disaster response, rather than prestigious research positions echoed my own journey while establishing her distinct path. The values transmitted were not about specific career choices, but about the underlying principles of meaningful contribution and authentic purpose. Even Richard, in his late-life recalibration, seemed to have absorbed some of these lessons. His shift from status-driven dominance to community engagement and relationship investment suggested that perhaps witnessing the trajectory of others had influenced his own understanding of what constituted a life well lived. Dr. Walsh's observation during our conversation had captured the essence perfectly. The greatest victory wasn't proving Richard wrong, but developing a vision entirely independent of his limited perspective. That autonomous vision of architecture serving community needs, of success measured by impact rather than accolades, of life defined by creation rather than competition, had ultimately shaped not just my career, but my approach to relationships, community, and purpose. As I turned to go inside, my phone chimed with one more message, from Emily. Just got the call. Habitat position confirmed, starting February in New Orleans. First project, redesigning emergency shelter systems for climate resilience. Couldn't be more excited about the real-world impact. Thanks for showing me what meaningful work looks like. Her words crystallized the most profound dimension of the journey that had begun that rainy night, that its impact extended beyond my individual path to influence Emily's understanding of purpose and possibility. The rejection that might have diminished had instead created expanding ripples of potential and perspective. In the morning, I would finalize plans for the Dixon Community Center groundbreaking, collaborate with our education foundation on scholarship, initiatives, and continue building spaces and opportunities that strengthened human connection. Each action would represent another step in the ongoing journey, initiated when Richard's rejection created an unexpected opening for new direction and discovery. The compass that had guided that journey now rested in its display case, its purpose fulfilled. The path forward had become clear not despite obstacles, but because navigating them had revealed essential truths about direction, purpose, and meaningful contribution. The story that began with, "You'll never amount to anything," had transformed into an ongoing narrative of creating something that truly mattered. Spaces, opportunities, and relationships that would continue evolving long after any individual journey concluded. And in that continuity lay the most complete answer to Richard's dismissal 15 years earlier. Success wasn't measured in mortgage deeds or professional accolades, but in the enduring impact of spaces designed to strengthen communities, opportunities created for others' growth, and values transmitted to future generations. By those measures, the journey initiated by rejection had amounted to everything that truly mattered. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.